Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, it is Poetry Thursday, a wonderful day to talk about all the interesting and, kind of unusual and maybe sometimes even normal poetry that attracts my eye. Unfortunately, I was so busy with work last week that I just didn't get the chance to do Poetry Thursday. But here I am now doing Poetry Thursday, and I want to talk about a poem from a classical, well-known author who is famous for a certain work. And this is one of her poems. It is about what I'm guessing to be depression and loneliness. I am referring to "I Am the Only Being Whose Doom," which is by Emily Bronte. For those who don't know, Emily Bronte, which is short for Emily Brontosaurus, is an English writer who lived in the 1800s. She lived for a relatively short period of time as she died prematurely from tuberculosis due to some bad water and whatnot, bad plumbing. But she did manage to write quite a bit of poetry, although not a lot of it was published in her lifetime. And I think she also wrote Wuthering Heights, which was published in her lifetime and which has since gone on to draw some critical acclaim. She is also known for being the sister of Charlotte Bronte, who wrote Jane Eyre and also some poetry. So quite famous sisters who both, I think, died, relatively early in their lives. Much like, I'm going to draw some comparisons here to Emily Dickinson, which is a theme that I've seen, or a shared theme in their writings, in their poetry. And I'll talk a little bit more as I analyze this poem. But yeah, I actually hadn't read anything by Emily Bronte prior to a couple of weeks ago when I first landed on this poem. But I'm really glad I decided to check it out because she seems like a very interesting poet, and her style as well as what the themes she talks about really resonates with me. And so without further ado, let's talk about "I Am the Only Being Whose Doom." I will read it, do a brief analysis, and we will move on from there. I am the only being whose doom. I am the only being whose doom no tongue would ask, no eye would mourn. I never caused a thought of gloom, a smile of joy since I was born. In secret pleasure, secret tears, this changeful life has slipped away, as friendless after 18 years, as lone as on my natal day. There have been times I cannot hide. There have been times when this was drear, when my sad soul forgot its pride and longed for one to love me here. But those were in the early glow of feelings since subdued by care, and they have died so long ago I hardly now believe they were. First melted off the hope of youth, then fancy's rainbow fast withdrew, and then experience told me truth in mortal bosoms never grew. 'Twas grief enough to think mankind all hollow, servile, insincere, but worse to trust to my own mind and find the same corruption there. And so that was "I Am the Only Being Whose Doom" by Emily Bronte. An interesting poem in terms of analysis. There's a fair bit to talk about here. One thing that I think she gets at this poem is loneliness. Like if you look at this poem, it's very clear what she's talking about. She feels lonely, like there's no one there in the world, and she's going through a bit of a rough time. I don't know exactly when she wrote this poem, but it does say "as friendless after 18 years." So I would presume that she wrote this at 18. So, the typical gothy teenager or something like that. But I think I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. But it's clear that she's getting at loneliness. And you can see that pretty early in the poem because she says, "I am the only being whose doom no tongue would ask, no eye would mourn." So she's kind of saying that she's the only person who feels like this. And although that's probably not true, like that's how a lot of people who with depression and anxiety and A lot of people with a lot of mental illness, like they feel that way, like this only they suffer this much, because it's hard to imagine anyone else feeling this way. Like she says, no tongue would ask, no eye would mourn. So like maybe if she died, no one would be there to cry for her. And she hasn't caused anyone to smile since she was born. It's pretty heavy to think like that there's no one there for her. In the third verse, she says, there have been times I cannot hide. There have been times when this was drear, when my sad soul forgot its pride and longed for one to love me here. It's like she wants to feel loved. But in the next verse, she says that it doesn't really feel like there's ever been anyone to love her, which is very unfortunate. And, as someone who finds it hard to date and be in relationships, I've kind of felt that way too. Like, especially when I was, after graduating high school and wondering to navigate where college is, am I unlovable or something like that. And, it's taken a bit to get over that and realize, of course, I'm lovable. Of course, I make people smile and they make me smile, and we're friends and we have that kind of relationship. But it might feel like for some teenagers that it doesn't feel that way. And so there's a great sense of loneliness that really hurts my heart and resonates with me in a way that I think maybe only Emily Bronte can really express here. Other writers have gotten at it, but I don't think it's been as so deep, depressingly sad as she describes here. And it really feels like a frustration with the world too in this poem, like a desire to see it change so that it makes you feel better or something like that. It feels like she's saying in a way that the world isn't that great. Maybe that's partially why she doesn't feel like she belongs, because she's so different from everyone else. All the other people are sheeple, which I'm joking there, but maybe that's what she's getting at. But it's very interesting, the last verse of this poem, where she says, "'Twas grief enough to think mankind all hollow, servile, insincere, but worse to trust my own mind and find the same corruption there." And so what I think she's getting at there is she was thinking mankind wasn't that great, hollow, there wasn't any complexity to other people. Insincere, kind of mean, not very nice, they're maybe they're lying to her, which is some very harsh feelings to be having. And what particularly stands out to me is the final verse there, or the final line there, where she says, "and find the same corruption there." In her own mind. So she's seeing this in others, and she's also seeing it in herself, and she wasn't expecting that. Maybe she's looking inward and doesn't like what she sees, which again, 18 years old in your teen years, maybe those are some very strong feelings that teenagers often have. And even afterwards, people who with severe depression may be looking inward and not like what they really see. So it's really jarring to kind of read this and see these, what we would later go on to call depression, because Emily Bronte didn't have a word for that in her, maybe melancholy or something like that, but there wasn't mental health, mental therapy, or any kind of therapy or pharmaceuticals back then to really address what she may have been going through. And again, it kind of reminds me of Emily Dickinson, as I was saying in the introduction, because they both talk about mental health and mental illness in their poems. And that feeling of longing for something else and not finding it, and just feeling like there's a pit in your heart and your soul where you can't seem to climb out of. I've been there. I know a lot of my friends have been there. But I'm really surprised to see it here because of the time period in which she lived. We're able to go to therapy now and get medication, SSRIs and whatnot, that lift us out of those periods. But Emily Bronte didn't have it, and she was described as being kind of a shy person lacking confidence, much like Emily Dickinson. And so I do wonder if for her there was a great deal of depression going on, or some kind of other unaddressed mental illness. And I honestly hope not, because that could be really tough, especially in a society where women who feel anything other than the norm are ridiculed or put into asylums, especially back in the 1800s. So very, very interesting, and I guess what I'm getting at is, if you're feeling this way, if this poem resonates with you because of what you're feeling now, definitely go seek help. Try to reach out to a friend or a therapist or something like that, because there is help for you out there. Like, I know these feelings might be strong or really hurt, like emotionally, mentally, physically, but there is help out there that can really address that. So I think very scattered thoughts with this poem, but all worth addressing here. So that was I Am the Only Being Whose Doom by Emily Bronte, a really solid poem worth talking about. I always love talking about mental health and mental illness and those sort of topics on this channel, because it's important to get the word out there, because there's a lot of stigma about those things in the world that maybe Emily Bronte couldn't have talked about in her time except through poetry, which she kept in journals that weren't published until after her death. Another issue there that like the question is, should we be publishing people's journals, especially when they talk about this kind of stuff? Because then aren't those people who sell it, like, aren't they profiting off their anguish in some sort of way? A lot of ethical issues there. But if you read this before, you simply want to, comment on something I said in my review here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about Emily Bronte and this poem. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this poem and this author, as well as Poetry Thursday. We need more people doing it on BookTube. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and doomy travels. Farewell.